All right, our next speaker is Lim Bing Nan, who I think goes by Mick if I'm not mistaken, and he is a PhD candidate at Northwestern University. He's all-around a Renaissance man who's done all sorts of work on European studies, and has a minor in musicology and has a master's in music research and music education with minors in philosophy of science and music and gender. And he's going to be speaking to us today on Gogol's Christmas Eve and two Imperial operas. Please welcome Mick.
Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen and sound. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. Today, I will present on Nikolai Gogol's tale, Christmas Eve, from the collection Evenings on a Farm near Dikanka, and two Imperial operatic adaptations of this story, Tchaikovsky's Cherbyshky and Rimsky-Korsakov's Christmas Eve. In comparing these two operas, I will focus on the differences between how each opera alludes to Catherine the Great and Prince Potemkin, and the Russian Empire from life in the capital, St. Petersburg, to rural peasant life. Before I begin, I would like to preface my presentation with an admission that this is my first foray into 19th century Russian music, and I ask for your kind understanding in advance. I'm sure there will be many blind spots and gaps in my appreciation of Imperial Russian music, culture, and censorship issues, and I look forward to improving on this paper based on your feedback. On 10th December 1895, Rimsky-Korsakov's Christmas Eve was finally premiered on the Mariinsky stage. Not all had been smooth sailing leading up to the premiere. The problem was an imperial order of 1837 prohibiting the representation of members of the the House of Romanov on the operatic stage. He had initially hoped that by leaving the identity of the Tsaritsa and the capital city ambiguous, he could plausibly claim that Christmas Eve was only fiction and somehow get away with representing Catherine the Great on stage. After being rejected by the censorship bureau, Rimsky-Korsakov convinced an old friend, Count Vorontsov-Dashkov, to intercede with the emperor to overrule the censorship bureau's decision. Permission was initially granted, but this victory was short-lived. The emperor suddenly withdrew his permission after the Grand Dukes Vladimir Alexandrovich and Mikhail Nikolaevich lodged a complaint after attending the ticketed dress rehearsal. They were peeved to recognize Empress Catherine the Great in the role of the Tsaritsa. In the premiere now in jeopardy, Rimsky-Korsakov was forced to substitute the mezzo-soprano Tsaritsa part for a baritone Most Serene Highness singing an octave lower. For his part, Rimsky-Korsakov resented this disfiguration to his opera and accordingly stayed home during its premiere to register his displeasure. Rimsky-Korsakov was not the first composer to make an opera out of Gogol's Christmas Eve. The other noteworthy setting I will be talking about today, Tchaikovsky's Cherbyshky, was first composed as Vakula the Smith, opus 14. It was based on a libretto by Yakov Polonsky, who had written it for Alexander Serov, who died without completing the opera. In addition, Tchaikovsky wanted to rename Vakula the Smith because there were multiple settings of the same story by 1887 by Nikolai Soloviev, Pyotr Shurovsky, Mykola Lysenko, and an unperformed setting by Nikolai Afanasiev. So what did Rimsky-Korsakov do so differently from all the others that he faced such an uphill battle for his premiere? Even though Tchaikovsky's Cherbyshky and Rimsky-Korsakov's Christmas Eve is frequently performed in opera houses across Russia, performances of these two operas are more sporadic in the West, perhaps owing to the massive casts that they require. In that case, I think a plot summary of Gogol's Christmas Eve is in order. Gogol's Christmas Eve is a Christmas-type story which focuses on the folk experience and telling fantastic stories about the most mysterious time of the day, the night before Christmas. For just before the bells rang on Christmas, the devil has one final night to teach good people to sin. The gist of the story is Vakula loves Oksana, but Oksana demands the Tsaritsa's slippers or Cherbyshky before she will marry him. Vakula is able to trick the devil, and they fly to St. Petersburg to get the Cherbyshky from the Tsaritsa, and he returns to the village and marries Oksana. But Gogol, the satirist, included political commentary in his stories, and one has to read for these extra-textual associations. In order to refer to the excesses of Catherine the Great's time, extra-textual associations in the form of allegory, allusion, Aesopian language, parody, textual pluralism, were developed by the literati. So firstly, in the scene at the Tsaritsa's court, Vakula is with the Cossacks, and during the meeting, they ask the Tsaritsa, "Why would you ruin loyal people? How have we angered you? Have we joined hands with the foe Tatar? Have we made any agreements with the Turk? Have we betrayed you in deed and in thought? Why then the disgrace? First, we heard that you had ordered fortresses built everywhere for protection against us. Then we heard that you wanted to turn us into carabinieri. Now we hear of new calamities. In what is the Zaporozhye army at fault? That it brought your troops across the Perekop and helped your generals to cut down the Crimeans?" And this is a reference to Catherine's annexation of the Crimean Khanate and disbandment and destruction of the Zaporozhian siege in 1775. Secondly, the Cherevichki were a dual reference. Firstly, to an opera stage in St. Petersburg during Catherine's time with the title Cherevichki, and self-referentially to Gogol's other story, Kolyaska, published in 1836, in which a provincial landowner bought fashionable sleeping shoes for his wife from St. Petersburg. In Christmas Eve, Oksana, the village girl, similarly demands the Tsaritsa's Cherevichki, and with Vakula praising of Catherine's legs to be of pure sugar, Gogol obliquely comments on how Russian people have been seduced and corrupted by the upper classes. While Gogol's Christmas Eve refers directly to Catherine the Great Potemkin in St. Petersburg, for the uninitiated, it remains an innocent, fantastic tale, and the veiled criticism only surfaces when one reads between the texts. It is furthermore noteworthy that Christmas Eve predates Kolyaska. In operatic adaptation, references to Catherine the Great have to be further veiled because of this imperial order of 1837. At first sight, it would seem that Gogol's story lends itself ideally to the Russian operatic tradition, with typical figures and tropes of the Russian folk theater tradition, including ample opportunities for ensemble, dance, choral singing. However, in depicting both village life and the court of Catherine the Great, the lack of unity of place poses challenges to musical unity, and the fantastic elements pose further challenges in staging. Already in Gogol's tale, we find that the characters develop at varying rates. Vakula and Oksana undergo great transformation, whereas some of the other minor characters, especially those which just provide comic variety, they often function more as figures than as characters, in the sense that we do not learn so much who they are as much as what they are or what they represent. Let's now compare Tchaikovsky's Cherevichki and Rimsky-Korsakov's Christmas Eve. Formally and on a macro level, the two operas are remarkably similar. Cherevichki comes in with 8 scenes in 4 acts, whereas Christmas Eve comes in with 9 scenes in 4 acts. And this discrepancy lies in the finale of Christmas Eve. There's a section titled In Memory of Gogol, which already hints at Rimsky-Korsakov's reverence towards his Gogolian source. Zooming in on our theme, music, Russian Empire, and the provinces, it becomes clear that where Tchaikovsky consciously avoided representing Catherine the Great, Rimsky-Korsakov was over-scrupulous in his adherence to his Gogolian source, both in the libretto and in recreating the musical sound world of the Ukrainian peasants in Catherine's day. The libretto to Cherevichki is in some respects a collaborative work between Polonsky and Tchaikovsky. Polonsky's libretto was previously intended for Alexander Serov, who was the first composer to draw on this tale for an opera. He died in 1871, leaving the work incomplete, as I've previously said. In 1872, the Russian Musical Society announced a competition to set this libretto to music, and in composing Kuznets' Vakula, Tchaikovsky was initially required to follow the strict rules of the competition and Polonsky's libretto. However, after winning the competition, Tchaikovsky requested various practical changes from Polonsky, which were deemed necessary for the production. And when Tchaikovsky later revised Kuznets' Vakula to Cherevitsky, he made even more changes to the text. And these revisions were certainly informed by Tchaikovsky's fondness for literature, Russian and foreign language literature from a very young age. And it is worth pointing out that the couplets in Scene 7, which were reworked by him, it then came to conform to the style of Catherine's time more closely. To this end, we can only speculate that Polonsky tacitly agreed to the changes because the two men were acquainted and seemingly enjoyed a good relationship. Rimsky-Korsakov, for his part, was a member of the jury of the aforementioned competition, and he had even written to Tchaikovsky praising various facets of the work, adding that he had no doubts that Tchaikovsky would win. However, he revealed in his autobiography that he had considered Tchaikovsky's operatic treatment of the subject weak and Polonsky's libretto good for nothing. Nonetheless, while Tchaikovsky was still alive, Rimsky-Korsakov felt that taking up the subject would have caused Tchaikovsky heartache, as with the case of Snow Maiden. Tchaikovsky had previously provided incidental music to the eponymous play and felt that Rimsky-Korsakov was encroaching. But after Tchaikovsky's death in the autumn of 1893, Rimsky-Korsakov quickly resolved to take on the Gogolian subject on his own terms. Although he apparently contradicts himself on the value of Tchaikovsky's music, Rimsky-Korsakov is consistently critical of Polonsky's treatment of Gogol's Christmas Eve. As with the case of his May Night, also based on the Gogolian subject, Rimsky-Korsakov's libretto was an individual undertaking. And despite being sharply critical of Polonsky's libretto, Rimsky-Korsakov nonetheless adopts his narrative structure. Consequentially, his libretto is a synthesis between his reverence for Gogol's Christmas Eve and his interpretation of pantheistic Slavic pagan religious beliefs. And this would prove a fateful and devastating mixture. Since I've been droning on for quite a while now, I would like to zoom in on the palace scenes and listen to some music. The palace scenes occur in Act 3 of both Cherevitsky and Christmas Eve. Both composers use the palace scene to insert dance numbers. Tchaikovsky opens his palace scene with a polonaise, which had already been playing in the background, under an exchange between a delegate Vakula and the Zaporozhian chorus. A brief scene change while the music is playing leads to a chorus glorifying an unnamed Tsarina. This is followed by His Serene Highness's couplets, a dance minuet in the background, and a scene in which Vakula asks His Serene Highness for the Tsarina's Cherevitsky. Tchaikovsky's libretto completely removes the role of the Tsaritsa. Instead, Potemkin announces everything on behalf of Catherine, and then invites the courtiers to go to attend a comedy at a private theater. Polonsky also cuts out the reference to the Crimean annexation, and Potemkin only says a decision will be made on your petition in a few days. As an oral cue for Catherine's presence, Tchaikovsky adopts a similar strategy as he did in Queen of Spades. He substitutes a polonaise as an oral cue for Catherine's presence. Polonaises have become associated with the House of Romanov following the Dejavin Kozlovsky Grom Pobiedi Rastavaysia, an unofficial anthem composed to commemorate the Imperial Russian siege of Izmail against the Ottoman Empire during the reign of Catherine the Great. So let's listen to Grom Pobiedi Rastavaysia.
You need to use the computer sound or something else because it goes.
Sorry?
You have to use better sound.
I have to use better sound?
Yeah, we don't hear it.
You have to share your audio?
Yeah, I did click on share sound. Maybe I should also click optimize it for video clip. Okay, let's see if this works. Oh. Sorry, is it working better now? Okay, great. Let me go back to my slide. Yeah, and whereas Tchaikovsky quoted Grom Pobiedi Rastavajsia in Queen of Spades, the Polonaise he composed in Chervichky is far more musically adventurous. So let's hear some of this. And that's the trill. So yeah, we can note the characteristic oscillation between chord 5 and flat 6, which dominates the harmonic language of this Polonaise, as well as the tight notes in the melody, which push against the 3/4 meter. And yeah, if you listen to the symbol in the symbols in the beginning, it's providing some metrical complexity pushing against the regular beat of the Polonaise. And moving on to Christmas Eve, instead of beginning with the Polonaise, Rimsky-Korsakov's Palace scene ends with the Polonaise with chorus. Preceding the Polonaise is a scene including a mazurka, a horovod, and a chardash, as well as various games and dance of the stars, a demonic dance with witches and wizards hitting pots and pans while singing about Kolyada and Ovsin. But before I get ahead of myself, let's listen to Rimsky-Korsakov's Polonaise. So I hear Rimsky-Korsakov's Polonaise as almost riffing off the Grom Pobiedi Restavicia, beginning with the rather obvious fact that these two Polonaises come with a chorus compared to Tchaikovsky's wordless Polonaise. In addition, the opening lines sound remarkably similar because of the repeated notes, right? Compared to the opening lead and active melody with accacciaturas in Tchaikovsky. Grom Pobiedi Restavicia and Rimsky-Korsakov's Polonaise also contain two contrasting and alternating themes, an energetic dotted first theme to the effect of let's make some noise, whether it be glory, trumpet, timpani, tsevnitsa, where that's the pan flute, I think it's a folk instrument, or let the thunder of glory of victory rumble. The second theme is lyrical, and the text refers to peace and tranquility in Rimsky-Korsakov's Polonaise, and glorifying Catherine the Great as our gentle mother in Grom Pobiedi Restavicia. Looking even closely at the text, closer at the text, one finds common themes between the two Polonaises, which appear in the same order. Firstly, and as previously mentioned, let's make some noise for this occasion. Secondly, glory to Catherine or the Tsarina, our mother, mother of a nation, mother of a people. Thirdly, some geographical boundaries which situate us in Russia. And here I was initially thrown off because the geographical markers in Grom Pobiedi Restavicia make sense. Catherine annexes Crimea or Taurida, and Imperial Russia gains control of the lower Danube after defeating the Ottoman Empire. On the side of Rimsky-Korsakov's Polonaise, there's a similar reference to Taurida, and it's true that Catherine's Russia stretches to Altai and China, even though there was a hiatus in Sino-Russian border conflicts throughout the 18th century. But the Romanovs did not acquire the Grand Duchy of Finland until 1809 under Alexander I. So I came to the conclusion that this just refers to Old Finland, the southern bit which was ceded by Sweden to Russia in 1721. And fourthly, both Polonaises end with some idealized physical descriptions of the absolutist Tsarina and a sporting mess. On the one hand, a brilliant Tsarina, we partake in your thoughts and decisions as one soul, and splendorous cathedrals, and on the other hand, a bright Tsarina, a harmonious choir, and a shining scepter. Moving on from the Polonaise, but remaining on the topic of texts, Rimsky-Korsakov is almost pedantic in his adherence to Gogol, especially in this instance where he reproduced the reference to the annexation of Crimea almost verbatim, and this makes it impossible to mistake Catherine in the role of the Tsaritsa. With the reference to the Crimean annexation, singing Tsarina on stage, with the stage set painted with the fortress of St. Peter and St. Paul, where the Romanov family is buried, it becomes very difficult for the censors to ignore. And now let's move away from the pomp and seriousness of the palace into the depictions of peasant life in the countryside. After all, Cherevitsky is the only semi-comic opera among Tchaikovsky's works, and while requesting the Tsarina's slippers may be a political gaffe or faux pas, it is in the informal and unregulated folk scenes in which proper indiscretion and impropriety can truly emerge. I must also add that having grown up in a Ukrainian village, Gogol was privy to the customs, superstitions, and folklore of peasant life in the periphery of the Russian Empire. In addition, Gogol was a descendant of Cossacks. After he moves away from his birthplace, he continues exchanging letters with his mother, asking for descriptions of village life and superstition. So even if he's writing fiction here, it is based on some lived practice, and there is ethnographical evidence of dwojevery, dual belief, or mixing of Slavic pagan rites with Christianity being practiced in Ukraine up to the late 19th century. The second act of both operas includes a comic scene drawing on these superstitions. In this scene, Solocha, the witch, who is also Vakula's mother, received unscheduled visits by esteemed members of the village community. The scene is set in Solocha's hut, and she's hanging out with the devil after she has stolen the moon, and the devil has created a snowstorm at the beginning of the opera. So very busy evening for them. Now, lost in the weather, the village head, or holova or glava, shows up, and Solocha hides the devil in a coal sack. The village head tries to seduce Solocha when the Diak shows up, and the village head now hides again in a coal sack. And from what I'm able to gather, a Diak is a clerk, but could also refer to a low-ranking church official. Now the Diak proceeds to seduce Solocha when Chup shows up. Chup now tries to seduce Solocha, and when Vakula returns home, Chup now hides in a sack, so they're all in sacks, and Vakula hauls all these sacks out to his smithy, and as you can imagine, it's all very comical. Now let's listen to how both composers deal with the interaction between Chup and Solocha from the time Chup shows up until Vakula appears. Whereas the village head and the Diak may be considered minor characters, Chup was an elderly Cossack and father of Oksana. So this is Tchaikovsky. I think I have to cut short the musical examples because I'm just looking at the time and we might be going over. So Tchaikovsky opts for an accompanied recitative with Chup and Solocha flirting, and when Vakula knocks the three men, the devil and Solocha, they break out in a quintet in the sex. And now let's listen to the Rimsky-Korsakov.
Солоха, здравствуй. Может, ты, Солоха, меня не ожидала? По правде, ты не ожидала. Может, помешал я? Быть может, забавлялись кем-нибудь вы? Быть может, спрятала кого ты?
Ах, что ты? Разве можешь?
Ну, Солоха, теперь мне дай горилки выпить. Горло застыло от мороза у меня.
тебе горилка, пей.
Спасибо. Вот так будет лучше. Эх, и метель. Давай сюда, красавица, бандуру. Да чарочку винца налей еще. Эй, чумачек, чумачек, эй, чумачек, чумачек.
Okay, and I'm also going to cut short the extract that I initially intended to play, but we can see that the flirting between Chub and Soroha is far less overt in the Rimsky-Korsakov's recitative. He just asks her to pour him a vodka, he calls her a beauty and begins singing this folk song before enjoining her to sing along. And eventually that's what she does. And now I'll play just a little bit from the original folk song.
Oj, czumacze, czumacze, hej, oj, czumacze, czumacze, hej, w tebe liczko kozacze.
So as I previously alluded to, Gogol's Christmas Eve presents a serious challenge for a composer who is trying to maintain musical coherence from the Ukrainian countryside in the periphery of the Russian Empire to the capital, St. Petersburg. To overcome this, Tchaikovsky and Rimsky-Korsakov pursued divergent strategies, and here we see both composers leaning on their individual strengths as opera composers. Tchaikovsky chose to lean into established tropes within the operatic tradition, such as exaggerating the antics of characters to comic effect. It is in this development of key characters which provides the thrust to Cherevitsky. And to this end, Tchaikovsky chose to linger in the Tsaritsa's palace, where his dance numbers serve to display even more facets of Vakula as a protagonist. The palace scene is important for the development of Vakula's character, for it displays how he is getting the Cherevitsky. And in the case of Rimsky-Korsakov, he lines up his musical focus with the focus of Gogol's story, which is the depiction of folk ritual and village life during the period of Christmas Eve. He achieves unity through realism. Ke Chumache Chumache is not the only folk song quotation in Rimsky-Korsakov's Christmas Eve. In fact, there's a dissertation by John Nelson which counts at least 3 Ukrainian kolyadki, 2 Ukrainian lyrical folk songs, 1 Ukrainian folk dance quoted by Rimsky-Korsakov in Christmas Eve. And in order to accommodate this large quantity of folk song material into Christmas Eve, Rimsky-Korsakov reworked some of these folk songs while retaining the text to others. And one can only surmise how this saturation of Ukrainian folk songs presents an accurate representation of the musical world of Ukrainian peasants in the times of Catherine the Great. And of course, as I've demonstrated, his Imperial Polonaise is a knockoff of Grompobiedi Rastavaisia. So to summarize my presentation, I have shown that by the time Rimsky-Korsakov composed Christmas Eve, Gogol's Christmas Eve was already a familiar story, and people recognized Gogol's criticisms of Catherine's time. I've shown that Tchaikovsky and Polonsky astutely steered clear of any reference to Catherine. Tchaikovsky's strength in opera composition is lyric writing and character development, and he focuses on developing the characters of Oksana and Vakula. Rimsky-Korsakov, on the other hand, followed Gogol very closely, both Gogol's text and situating the musical world in which Gogol's story occurs, that is, in Catherine's Russian Empire. And to return to my opening intrigue, I think Rimsky-Korsakov's all persons fictitious claim is rather disingenuous and certainly rings hollow. I stop share.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have enough time for a couple of questions. Let's make some questions. I'll start us off. I have a quick question. Since your paper is titled "Two Imperial Operas," could you comment on the different visions of the empire between these two composers you're discussing?
I think, I mean, like I've mentioned in my paper, Rimsky-Korsakov really tries to present the musical world of the Ukrainian countryside. So he's really shooting for realism or super realism, hyperrealism. But Tchaikovsky, on the other hand, he just uses the tale as a vehicle for developing characters and writing lyrical numbers rather than a specific vision of the Russian Empire during Catherine's time. I think also Tchaikovsky did change the libretto that Polonsky provided him, but Rimsky-Korsakov crafted his own libretto. So I think this vision of a Russian Empire, or what it was like, came through much more in Rimsky-Korsakov than in Tchaikovsky, because I think in the case of Tchaikovsky, it really could have been a fictitious Russian Empire.
Other questions? Professor Naroditska, please.
We can't hear you.
You're muted.
Professor Zavlunov, I think you brought the interesting question of the different vision of empire. I've never thought of this, but it's a very interesting question. And of course, Taruskin stated that Tchaikovsky was the imperial 18th century composer, while Rimsky in the next decade will stand with his students in the St. Petersburg in the demonstration. I just want to say, Mik, did you miss, or I missed, your mentioning of Derzhavin?
I did mention Derzhavin, the Grom Pobedi, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did play it.
So it is actually 18th century taking of Ismail, which is the war over Ukrainian territories. Okay, so that's very interesting. Yes. Okay, that's all.
Are there any other questions? Well, then we're going to take a pause now. Thank you again, Meg, for your paper. Let's reconvene in about 7 minutes and continue after break. See you then.